When you look at the Day of Atonement, very much in contrast to the Day of Trumpets in the Old Testament, there's a lot of explanation. There's a lot of symbols that are associated with the Day of Atonement. You have the two goats, all right, the one that's for the Lord, and then the Azazel goat, as they're called. Along with the two goats, you of course have the meaning or the name of the day, atonement. That's this cleansing sacrifice. You have a focus on the mercy seat where God himself sits, and the blood of that goat, which is for the Lord, is brought. And of course, you have that powerful symbol of hope in the Jubilee Year, right, which only happens once every 50 years. And if you think about that, once every 50 years, that means it probably only happens once, maybe twice, if you're very young, once or twice in any person's lifetime. And it's an amazing symbol of the day because it pictures this redemption and restoration of God's people to him, to the land that he's given to him. And interestingly, this Jubilee year is associated with the blowing of trumpets and making teruah, right? The same symbols that we know from the Day of Atonement. And all of these symbols work powerfully together, right? They help us understand what this day pictures, right? It's a time where Christ will have returned. We know he returned on the Day of Trumpets, that he comes back, he fights the armies of this world, and he wins. He's the king now. And then, this day, he is that living sacrifice. He goes before his Father, who's sitting, of course, on the mercy seat, and his Father accepts his Son's sacrifice for all of mankind's cleansing, right? Not just one or two here and there, not just even the church today, but all of mankind. He makes this atoning sacrifice. And as the writer of Hebrews, if you remember those words where it talks about Christ going before the Lord or before the mercy seat and presenting his offering, it's a great deep picture of what this day means. And then, of course, it goes on, and Christ ensures the binding up and removing of Satan, the great tempter of sin, and breaks his deceptive hold on all of mankind. And then, of course, when this is done, and this is, effectively when the Jubilee year will kick off, not just once every 50 years, but becomes the future. It's where Christ, restores mankind and redeems him and can effectively go and start to rebuild. This day is a day of deep meaning and powerful symbols that we should study and understand. But today I want to focus on the same symbol that Mr. Slocum focused on earlier. So it's an important one for us. And, of course, it's probably top of mind. It's the one that we feel most deeply. And what I want to do, and I love the foundation, and we'll reuse some of the scriptures that Mr. Slocum went to, but I want to focus on how does afflicting our souls tie to the rest of the story, right? We know this great story that I just, painted the picture around that this day pictures, yet in some ways this afflicting your soul almost seems like it's a separate thing. And we'll go and we'll read. So if you turn first to Leviticus 16, I want to, and if you read all of Leviticus 16, it talks about a number of these symbols, the goats and the mercy seat. You can go and read about the Jubilee year. But there's a lot of explanation about why those are there, right? You can really understand how they picture together. But I want to read just this section here, Leviticus 16, verse 29. It says, and this is after giving all of the explanation about the goats and the sacrifices and the binding up of the Azazel goat and putting it out and all of these things in great detail. And it says here, this shall be a statute forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your soul, right? And of course, Mr. Slocum went through and explained what that affliction of the soul means for us physically. And do no work at all, whether you're a native or your own country or a stranger that dwells among you. But there's no explanation. Why? Why are we to afflict our souls on this day? It goes on in verse 30. It's not like God is running out of words or room. Because here, it says, for on this day that the priest shall make an atonement. So he's talking about this atonement, the sacrifice of the the goat for the Lord. And it says it's to cleanse you. He explains this is what that is for, that you may be cleansed from all, or clean from all your sins before the Lord. So we have a very clear explanation of what that sacrifice of the goat of the Lord is for, what the priest atonement is for. It's for cleansing, for cleaning our soul of the sins that we've had before the Lord. And it goes on in verse 31, is a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, and you shall afflict your soul. It's a statute forever. But again, it doesn't explain why we should afflict our souls. It goes on in 32 and 33 and talks about all the atonement that's happening, the atonement for the priests, for the sanctuary, for the tabernacle, for the priests, and for for the high priest and all the priests and all the people, the assemblies. And it goes on and it says, this shall be an everlasting statute for you to make atonement for the children of Israel for all of their sins once a year. And he did as the Lord commanded Moses. So you see this very detailed explanation. Again, if you go and read Leviticus 16 throughout, you see this very deep explanation on every single point or every single symbol except for afflicting our soul. And Mr. Slocum read in 23, where we also see this afflicting our soul. We won't turn there. But again, there's no explanation. Why are we doing it? How is it tied to the rest of the day? And as Mr. Slocum pointed out, there's this clear connection between fasting and the command to afflicting our soul. But what is the purpose? And that's what I want to focus on. What is the purpose of afflicting our souls? And how is it tied to the rest of the Day of Atonement? Right? Is it just something kind of separate off to the side, or is there some connection between those that God wants us to understand? So here we'll turn and we'll read Isaiah 58. This is, of course, a great set of scriptures where if you really want to understand what God intends for fasting, and as we'll see, not just fasting, but fasting on this day. This is tied very much to this day. Then this is the set of scriptures that you need to spend time in, that you need to understand. So it says, and I'm going to read out of the NIV because I think in a couple of the verses it's a little bit clearer what's trying to be gotten across here. So this is Isaiah 58, verse 1. Shout it aloud, do not hold back, right? This is something you want to make sure everybody hears. If you can think about it, God today wants us to hear this twice. He wants us to really soak it in and understand, because what can happen? We can go year after year after year. I trying to think back. I think I started fasting when I was about 9 or 10, somewhere around there. So it's almost 40 or, oh no, I can't even get my age right. 35 years. So that's 35 years-ish I fasted. Some I'm sure fasted many more years, some maybe a fewer. But you can do it time and time again. And as you do it, and especially if you do it throughout the year, it's uncomfortable. My mouth is already starting to get a little dry. Maybe a little bit of hunger, but we can get used to it. We can get used to it and it not have the same meaning, the same impact that it did. I remember it was my second year. So my first year when I fasted, I did it mainly just to compete with my brother, just being honest. He was older than me. He had a very hard time. I'm like, if he can do it, I can do it. It was no problem. First year, not a problem. Second year, when it wasn't about competing, but it was actually about fasting, it was a pretty rough year. I'm like, it was probably, in those days we had 2 services, and in that middle service, I remember we would always, have fun, and we would, sing like McDonald's or Burger King commercials to each other to get, us. But by that second service, I was done. I was just kind of sitting there in the chair, not really doing that much. But as it goes on, we can just get used to it. We can, not have a big deal because we've done it so many times, and then for those that fast regularly throughout the year, it can become something that's just normal. But God doesn't want it to be normal, all right? And here he's saying, shout it aloud, do not hold it back, raise your voice like a trumpet, declare to my people their rebellion and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. So here, and particularly this verse 2, I think this is where the NIV gives a better translation. Because here, he's saying it seems like they're seeking me, that they're trying to find me. It says they seem eager to know my ways as if they were a nation that does what is right. So you get this indication that God's saying it's all surface. It's all surface. They're just trying to seem eager. They're trying to do what is right. And it goes on, and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Right? They seem eager, it looks. And this is, of course, what we know from the Pharisees, right? They seemed eager. They seemed like they were God's people. They were very religious. They did a lot of things to make it look like they wanted God in their life, that they wanted to follow the ways of God. But we know from Christ that was exactly the opposite, right? And then in verse 3, it says, why have we fasted, they said, and you have not seen it? Again, as Mr. Slocum pointed out, it's all for show. Like, we want you to see that we have fasted, right? This was also, Christ talks about the Pharisees, putting on this great display of fasting. They wanted God to see they were fasting. They wanted man to see that they were fasting. But they didn't want to do the things that are important as part of God's fast, as we'll see. They said, have you not seen it? We look like we're fasting. We put on our sackcloths. We have our contorted faces. We're sitting there back, so weak. You should see us. You should understand what we're doing. It goes on, why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit your workers. Right? Your fast ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. God's people, God's nation was fasting to get noticed by God, but at the same time, they were doing things that were unjust, cruel, proud, and wicked, or the exact opposite of what you're to do. They weren't really humbling themselves to know what God wanted them to do. They were humbling themselves so God, as Mr. Slocum said, would be forced to do what they wanted God to do, right? And this was a very pagan approach to interacting with God or gods, right? Because the pagans at the time, the nations around them would, as we read in the Old Testament, the example of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, they would cut themselves, they would fast, they would, sing praises to do what? Not to do what the God wanted them to do, but so that the God would do what they wanted to do. They had it backwards. It wasn't them trying to understand the will of, their God. It was them trying to force their God to do something. And here, the God, the living God is telling his people, I don't want that. I am not going to be forced to do what you want me to do. No, you're going to humble yourselves and learn what I want you to do. And it goes on. In verse 5, it says, is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? So he's saying, as we start to tie in, what are we to do? Is it only to humble ourselves? Is it only to afflict our souls? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And again, if you think back to those symbols, the goats, atonement, mercy seat, the Jubilee year, we can see how those fit together into a story, into the story that God wants us to understand that he's going to come and do. But why fasting? Here it's saying, yes, we need to be humbled by the sacrifice that God has made, but there's more to learn from fasting. So let's continue reading here in verse 6. It says, is not this the kind of fast I have chosen? Now, listen carefully to the words, because this is where it ties back to the Day of Atonement. This is to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Now here, I'm going to reread these words. To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Where do these words come from? What does this tie into in the Day of Atonement? Well, it's the year of the Jubilee, right? It's the proclamation of the year Jubilee. If you'll turn over a couple of chapters to Isaiah 61, we'll read just a set of verses here. You can also go and read these in Leviticus, where the command around the Jubilee year was given. But you turn here to Isaiah 61, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has appointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prisons to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." Now, this acceptable year of the Lord is the Jubilee year. This is what it's talking about here. The day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And now look at this last part, because there's a purpose. There's a part that we play in it as well. It says that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. So we start to see here this idea, this concept that what God is looking for out of our fast is of the same spirit, the same essence of the year of the Jubilee, right? This is part of, yes, the Jubilee year is only once every 50 years, so once, maybe twice in a person's lifetime. But what he is saying in Isaiah is that the year after year after year of afflicting our souls is meant to tie us to that Jubilee year. It's meant for us to anticipate and to do our part, to do our pieces of the year of Jubilee year, not just once, but all the time. And we can read through and understand that these actions, which are associated with what is true and proper fasting, are acts of justice, mercy, and faith. Right? It's completely a 180 from the actions that he talked about at the beginning of Isaiah 58, where the people were wicked and were, abusing those workers and abusing those that were lower than them. So it's an exact 180. This is the difference. God is saying, no, you're fasting, and yet the outcome of your fast is wickedness. I'm saying the outcome of my fast should be righteousness, and this is what we see here, that we're to be called trees of righteousness and the planting of the Lord. So again, make no mistake, this righteousness is coming from the Lord, right? Because he's the one that's planting it, that he may be glorified, but we're to be doing the righteous acts, the righteous things. So going on in Isaiah 58, it says, "Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness," right? So exactly what we saw in Isaiah 61, this tie between these acts that we're supposed to do, that's laid out in Isaiah 58, 6 and 7, that's tied to the meaning, the spirit of the Jubilee year. He's saying, then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Now, what do we think about when we think about fasting? What are the physical things that happen to our bodies? We hunger and thirst. Now, where else have we heard hunger and thirsting for righteousness, or in conjunction with righteousness? Of course, and here I'm going to switch back to the New King James Version for the rest of the message, but of course, Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." The Lord here through Isaiah is making the connection between the Day of Atonement, the fast and afflicting our soul associated with it, with the language of the Jubilee year, which of course started on the Day of Atonement, and then with us, you and I, individually, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Right? We can see this tie together, the fast that God has chosen. If you and I are hungering and thirsting in the right way today, if we're hungering and thirsting in the right way, not just physically, and of course, we're all going to be hungering and thirsting physically, but if we're really doing it the right way, the godly way, it will have us end up demonstrating not just thinking about, not just looking at, but demonstrating justice, mercy, and faith, which of course leads then to our righteousness, of coming from God, flowing from God through us, but going forth from us. Think about this, righteousness going out from us. This is, of course, the picture that we would think about with Christ, and it's true. But here, Isaiah is saying if we're humbling ourselves, if we're thirsting and hungering for righteousness, then it should eventually come out and flow out from us. Nice distraction. But that's what God is saying here. He's saying our fasting is to have a purpose. It's not to just be hungry and thirsty physically. No, we're to hunger and thirst. It's to remind us to hunger and thirst for righteousness. And this righteousness has to be demonstrated by actions, by justice, mercy, faith. And again, just to really reemphasize this point that while it says it's our righteousness, it's very clear in the text that it's our righteousness, it's God that is causing it to flow through us. It's his Spirit. It's him working within us. So God, God himself calls it our righteousness, but it's done to glorify him and to show the power and the might of his Spirit working within us. Right? And what does that make us on this day? Right? If we have God's righteousness flowing through us, what does that make us this day? At one with God. At one with God, right? So we can start to see how this fasting, this afflicting our soul is very much tied to this day. All right, it's tied to essentially the key outcome, because this is how we are going to be redeemed and restored to God himself. It's the day where not just you and I that know these things today and have been blessed to have his Spirit working within us today. No, it'll be a day when all of mankind at large, can be at one with God. And as we look about it, think about, where do we go when we're hungry and thirsty physically? Go to the pantry, to the refrigerator, we go to the sink. If we don't have a lot of food, we go to the grocery store. It's pretty easy. We can go and we can find it. We can go and get it. But spiritually, and again, we know these things, but just as a refresher, where do we go when we're hungry and thirsty? Because again, it's a process. God says, come to me, hungry and thirsty. Now we'll look at it a little bit more, because the type of hunger and thirst we're to have is very much tied to this day, and there's another type of hunger and thirst that we'll look at as well. But today, where are we to go? Where are we to look? The first place you might go is Deuteronomy 8, verse 3. Moses reflecting back on the lessons that have been taught to the Israelites. What did he say? He says, so he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, or the mouth of the Lord. Right? And of course, Christ expands on this. John 6:35, and Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. John 7:38, he who believes in me, as the scriptures have said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Right, brethren, we afflict our soul today by fasting, not to remind ourselves of the physical feeling of going without food and water, but we do it to remind ourselves that through this dark glass that we can look at, the spiritual world, that we don't like how it feels to live apart from Christ. Right? Do you like how you feel when you hunger and fast? And then again, if this has become an easier day, do it for 2 days, do it for 3 days, do it a little bit, like eventually, and I love the exercise of holding your breath, because that gives you the idea of in a few seconds of what it feels like. But go, what happens? You start to feel weak. You don't feel yourself. You start to get headaches. Your body starts to slow down, right? Your mind doesn't work as well. And we know, right? Your mind is a muscle and needs It needs glucose. It needs a lot of things, a lot of energy to do all the things that it's doing. And as you start to not have that food and that water, your body just slows down. We don't like the feeling, the rumble in our stomach, right? That's meant to tell us, go eat. The dry mouth. I don't think anyone likes to go around and where you just get that like very dry, not moist mouth. No, we want it nice and moist. But this is what it can remind us that there was a time where we spiritually hungered and thirst for Christ. We didn't even know we should go look for Christ in some cases. But then when he came and he gave us the bread of life and he gave us this river of living water flowing out of our heart, now we're filled all the time. And sometimes we can forget what it felt like before. And so we do this to remind ourselves or to make ourselves think back to that time before when we didn't have Christ, when Christ wasn't part of our lives every day. And it reminds us very much, we can't live apart from Christ. What would happen physically if we went without food and water? We would die eventually. I should have gone back and looked, but water, it's not very long. It's just maybe a week or something like that, maybe even fewer. Food, you can go a little bit longer, but you can't go a year, right? We're talking, you can't even go 6 months. You're talking, less than a month. But do we feel that? Do we remember that spiritually, right? And what is that like when we're apart from Christ? Yes, maybe spiritually we'll physically live a little bit longer, but we die. Part of us dies if we're apart from God, even for a little bit. Let's look at, and this is something that all through the Old Testament and the Psalms and the prophets, they tell us how much we need God and that God alone can satisfy us. And let's just turn to a few of the Psalms. We'll actually read one of the as the deer pants for water, but that won't be the first one. So if you turn to Psalms 107, we'll read just a few verses here. Psalms 107, and again, we won't read everything, but I encourage you, as you think about this day and what we're trying to do, this is one of those Psalms that you should go back to and read because it tells us about our story. It reminds us of our story. It says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever." And again, mercy seat, the thing that he's sitting on today. "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy." Again, redemption. This day is a day of redemption, of restoration. "And gathered out of the lands from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. They wandered in the wilderness in a desolate way. They found no cities to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their souls fainted in them." Now, of course, if you ever go to the desert, and we've been to Arizona, we've been to Utah, for those that have gone to Israel and other places of the desert, especially thirst, it comes on you fast, right? Because everything's dry, the moisture is just kind of being wicked out of you. And so, here it's talking about they're in this wilderness, this desolate way, and they're hungry and they're thirsty and their souls are fainting in them. And then what do? So they're in need. They need something. And then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them out of their distress, and he led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city for a dwelling place. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men, for he satisfies the longing soul, and he fills the hungry soul with goodness. And as we read, he does it in a way that never ends. Once Christ is in you, you have that river of living water. You have that bread of life that fills you constantly. You never have to worry again about hunger and thirst. Right? And as you go on, you start to see in this psalm this redemptive cycle, this day of atonement, right? That the people are crying out, are longing for something. In some cases, they don't even know what they're longing for. They just know they need something, right? Their bodies are telling them, their souls are telling them. And yet, God is going to hear that cry, and is going to redeem them, restore them. Let's jump all the way down at the bottom of this Psalms 107, verse 35. It says, he turns a wilderness into pools of water. Right now what's a wilderness? It's something that doesn't have any water, and then he turns it, just like he did for the Israelites in the 40 years of wandering. Whenever they needed water, he would create pools of water. He would lead them to pools of water. This is in dry land into water springs. There he makes the hungry dwell, that they may establish a city for a dwelling place, and sow fields and plant vineyards, that they may yield a fruitful harvest. He also blesses them, and they multiply greatly, and he does not let their cattle decrease. When they are diminished and brought low through oppression, affliction, sorrow, right? Affliction. He pours contempt on the princes and causes them to wander in the wilderness where there is no way. Yet he sets the poor on high, far from affliction, and he makes their families like a flock. The righteous see it and rejoice. All iniquity stops its mouth. Whoever is wise will observe these things, and they will understand the loving kindness of the Lord. Right? This is what this day is about. God will lift up the afflicted. He will lift up the oppressed. He will start to put the world back together with his sacrifice, with his strength of putting away Satan, with his mercy, with his Jubilee plan. Right? He will fill those who are hungry and thirsty. Let's read one more psalm. I was talking to Keith about this earlier. This is, one of my favorite songs because it paints such a deep impression of what we should be doing on this day. Psalms 42, verse 1, to the chief musician, a contemplation of the sons of Korah. As the deer pants for the water brook, so pants my soul for you, O Lord, or O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God, right? Are you thirsting? Is your soul thirsting for the living God? When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they continually say to me, where is your God? When I remember these things, I pour my soul out within me. For I used to go to the multitudes. I went with them to the house of God with a voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept a pilgrim feast. Right here, the psalmist is so desperately seeking to be one with God. They're searching, they're yearning for God. And of course, God was there. Right? God was there. It's not that he was absent. It was not, it was in the story of Elijah and Baal where the priests are making loud noises and trying to create a ruckus. And Elijah says, is your God asleep? Is he using the bathroom? Is he somewhere that he can't be found or can't be disturbed right now? He'll come. You just have to be, a little bit more patient, a little bit more loud. No, God is here. He's right beside the psalmist. But still the psalmist knows how much he needs the living God, how much he needs that bread of life, that river of living waters flowing forth from him. But as desperately as we should be seeking and yearning God, is just this feeling of spiritual hunger and thirst enough? Is that all that God wants us to do on this day? Is it all that God wants us to do on this day? Let's go back to Isaiah 58. And we'll start by rereading some of the verses we read. This notion of hunger and thirst for righteousness begins, of course, with the longing that we read about in the Psalms. It begins with the longing for God, for Christ, this bread of life, this river of living waters being inside of us. But it doesn't end there. No, we're actually called to show God our hunger and thirsting for righteousness. Not just enough that it builds up inside it. We actually have to do things to show that we hunger and thirst for this righteousness. So Isaiah 58, verse 5. It says, is it a fast which I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day of the Lord? Right here, God is saying it's not just enough to afflict our soul, to spread out the sackcloth and ashes. We have to use that to do something. There's something more. And he goes on and he says what that more is. In verse 6, is it not the fast which I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness? Now, of course, that's only something that God can do, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. So those things are things that only God and Christ can do. But look at this next section. Then there's verse 7. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? You have to go take that thing that you've been given and then share with others, right? And this hunger, we choose today whether we're going to fast or not. We choose. You go, you eat. That's between you and God, right? If you go and you drink, you and God know. But that's a choice. You're making a choice not to eat today. What this is talking about is people that don't have a choice. They're not choosing to be hungry. They're not choosing to be thirsty. And that's what our opportunity is, to go out to those who have not chosen to be hungry, not chosen to be thirsty, and to share what we've been given, the bread of life, the river of living waters. It goes on and says, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out. When you see the naked, that you cover them and not hide yourself from your own flesh, right? These are actions that God is calling for you and us to do. You notice he says, is this the fast that I have chosen, right? Those things that are just, you stop at longing for God, right? Where you stop at just afflicting your soul. No, he's saying the fast that I have chosen means you take that longing for God, that longing for righteousness, and then you have righteousness go forth from you. And it goes on and it says, then your light shall break forth like the morning. And again, this isn't God's light. Of course, this is God's light through you. But no, this is your light. God can go and shine his light wherever he wants to shine it. But he's saying, no, I want you to take what I've given you. I want you to take my light that I've given you, and you go shine forth like the break forth in the morning. Your healing shall spread forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go forth before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Now think about that imagery, right? God's behind you. God's the one that's helping you. God's the one that ultimately it all is through. But he wants to be behind you. He wants to strengthen you, but he wants you to go forth and do these things, right? Not him. If he wanted to be out in front, he could be out in front. And in a lot of ways, for God, it'd probably be simpler, right? He wouldn't have to work through you and I. I can only imagine what he thinks when he has to work through me. But hearing God saying, I'm going to be right behind you, but you have to go do these things, and it should go forth from you. This is, then you shall call. Notice this. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, and the pointing of the finger, and the speaking of wickedness, right? So if you turn from wickedness to righteousness, what does it say in verse 10? It says, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. Right? So when we are fasting, what should our focus be on? Our hunger and thirst, our longing for God. And again, that's not incorrect. But what God is saying, if it ends there, that's not the fast he's chosen. It's not the fast that on this day in particular that he's chosen. He wants it to be something more. And again, everyone in this room has chosen. It's a choice. We can be filled at any time with the bread of the living water, or the bread of life and the river of living waters. We can go and physically eat anytime. We can drink anytime, but we're choosing to be hungry. We're choosing to fast. But the poor and the needy, both spiritually and physically, they're hungering and thirsting through no choice of their own, right? They've been deceived. Physically, they've been oppressed by those who are in power, right? And God says, that's not my way. That's not my way. He says, if you think the people that God is talking about, they don't even know what they need. They don't even know where to go and look. They don't know where to find this spiritual filling, this spiritual satisfaction. How do they know? Well, of course, God could go out and reach them as he did you and I, but in a lot of cases, I don't know, I'd guess well over half. How did you come in to the faith of Christ? Did you come in because God reached out directly to you? I came in because of my parents, right? They came in because of their parents. I'm sure, maybe not all. God does. He reaches out, and he reaches out individually to people, he himself directly. But no, what he's looking for is for you and I to continue the process that he started with others that he reached out directly to. That for me, I'm to continue the process that he started with my parents and my parents' parents. In some cases, of course, if you trace it all the way back, it started with Abraham. So we're called to go and help those that are looking for this food that they don't even know they can have, that we're to go out and we're to be the ones to show them the way, show them the path, that we're to be the light that shines. And if you think about it, it defies all logic. If I'm hungry, if I'm thirsty, I should take care of myself first, right? What do they say on the airplane? The mask comes down, who do you put the mask on? They're very clear. You're to put the mask on, the person beside you? No, you're to put the mask on yourself. That's human logic. We're to save ourselves, and in a lot of physical ways, that's probably true. Like in that airplane case, there's a good chance if you put it on someone else, you might not have a chance to do it, especially if it's a parent and child. So I'm not just talking about the physical, but this defies logic. If we're hungry, if we're thirsty, we're to go satisfy an afflicted soul, someone outside of us. That just doesn't make sense. But God says, no, trust me. Be willing to sacrifice yourself, what you need, what you desire for the benefits of others. And then when we do that, when we trust God and we sacrifice ourselves, what happens? Verse 11, the Lord will guide you continuously and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. It's not that we're going to do it and we're going to die. No, we have to have faith, and it might feel like it. We might go so far that it feels like we're going to die, but God says, no, I'm going to be there right at the last minute, right at the point where you might think that you're going to die. I will be there. And then what does it say? He says, you shall be a watered garden and a spring of water whose water does not fail. Think about this. A watered garden, what does that equal? That's something that's continuously making new food, right? You're never going to hunger because it's well watered. It's growing. You're going to have fruits and vegetables at all times. This is the imagery that God is saying, much like the bread of life and a spring of water whose water does not fail, right? You'll never be thirsty. So God is saying, if you'll just trust me, if you'll trust the story that I have, the process that I have, you go out and you feed those that are afflicted, that they don't even know what they need. Don't worry. I'll make sure you have food. I'll make sure you have water. And not just a little bit, not just, I'll get you by. No, you're going to have an abundance, more than you could even ever do for yourself. And then in verse 12, it goes on and it says, those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. When we look at the story, if we step back and we look at the story of this day that God repeats for us year after year, even his whole holy day plan, right? This Day of Atonement is a shift in the story. It's a shift in the story. The spring holy days show a plan starting from just the smallest seed, Christ himself. And it grows, but it grows in a constrained way. God says, I'm picking my people. I'm going to have a small harvest. And then the Feast of Trumpets, it's a time of massive destruction. In some ways it looks like everything is going backwards. I'm sure if there were newspapers on the day after that day, they would say, we can't recover. It's unrecoverable. There's no way we can come back from that mass destruction. We see what happens today with great destruction, great sadness, great sorrow that happens, and yet it's nothing of the magnitude that's pictured by the day or the Feast of Trumpets. And so, of course, Christ returns, but he returns to what? A broken and destroyed kingdom, right? If you think about it, it's only a kingdom he could desire. It's only going to be a kingdom he could desire because what the earth was right before he comes back is going to be, in a physical sense, in a physical sense, in a sense of mankind, it's a much better place. Lots more people, yes, there's been a lot of destruction, but you look around and it's pretty nice. We've built a nice place for ourselves here, haven't we? And yet Christ is going to come back and it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be a kingdom that only he could desire. And then this day of atonement pictures the start of the rebuilding on a grand scale. And the rebuilding not in the ways of man, but in the ways of God, right? Then it will be a kingdom that not only Christ will desire, but all of mankind will enjoy. The restoration of the earth, and more importantly, the restoration of relationships between all of mankind and God. First, of course, it's with his living sacrifice, which is accepted by his Father, who's sitting on that mercy seat. Then he takes his sacrifice to cleanse all of mankind with that atoning sacrifice. And then he ensures that Satan is bound up and removed, that he can't tempt anymore. He can't deceive the world anymore. And then he announces with loud fanfare, as so to speak, his Jubilee plan. Right, his Jubilee plan, the beginning of this plan where he restores people, he puts the people back in the places that he wants, in the ways that he wants. And these are all great and wonderful things, and we should long for them, we should hope for them. And this is, in some ways, the beginning, the dawn of the restoration, right, is this day. It's a day of great hope, a great longing that we should have. But afflicting our souls is different. It's about you and I, right? It's about you and I, us as a body, as the bride of Christ, showing not through words, but through actions that we hunger and thirst for righteousness. Not just hunger and thirst that we long to be satisfied by God, but we hunger and thirst that we can help others be satisfied, that we can help. We can be part of that plan that God has built, that we can be part of the process, right? That he's going to stand behind us as a rear guard. Yes, he's going to strengthen us. Yes, it goes forth from him to us, but it shouldn't stop at us. It has to go beyond us. It has to go from him through us, and we have to be there. We have to demonstrate our justice, our mercy, our faith, seeking out those who are poor and needy, who are hungry and thirsty, not out of choice, like you and I are, but because they're oppressed, because they've been deceived, because they've been put upon by the powers of this age, this world. And we're to go help them find the bread of life, the rivers of living water, so that they can be satisfied forever. It's for us as a body saying that our needs can wait, that we can wait, we can go about and do the work of Christ. We know that Christ will fill them. We have full confidence that he will fill them, but that what we're going to go about the work and the purpose of our husband and his Father, right? We're going to be part of that plan. We're going to feed, we're going to heal, we're going to repair, we're going to restore. That we're not going to lead lives for our own purposes and desires, but it's going to be our lives for the plan and purpose of our Lord and our King. Right? This is what this day, this afflicting our soul, is supposed to help us understand, that we have to get past ourselves and into the point of helping others. Right? That was the difference in Isaiah. Right? They were all worried. God didn't even say what they were asking for. He didn't say what they were asking for was wrong, even though they were doing wicked things. Right? He said, you were not taking care of those who were in need. You were focusing on your needs first. And so we today, by hungering and thirsting, by fasting, we're declaring that we stand beside Christ, that we're going to work with him to build the old waste places, to raise up the foundations of many generations, to be repairers of the breach and restorers of the street. So as we fast today, let us not fast just a physical fast. Let us not just fast even a spiritual fast where we end at longing for God to be part of our life. No, we have to take that longing, and then we have to have it go forth from us. We have to show that we hunger not for bread, that we thirst not for water, but that we hunger and thirst for righteousness.